Hey there, everyone, and good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Chris Bear. I'm producer of Unstuck, an OCD Kids movie, and I just want to let you know that we are starting, year two. This is episode 13 of Unstuck Kids Speak Out. I'm really excited to have this go on. I never thought it would, take off, but so many kids have volunteered, or so many kids have been gracious enough to share their stories with us. It's been fantastic. So I'm looking forward to continuing this on. And if you're just tuning in, feel free to share this with your friends, your networks, comment, share. We're going to be talking to Kathryn in a few minutes, and she's going to give us an update on how OCD affected her life, how therapy worked for her, and how she deals with obsessive compulsive disorder as well as intrusive thoughts now in her life. So it should be a fun 45 minutes to an hour, and it works better when you offer questions and share this out and, respond. So the more we can make this interactive, the more fun it'll be. So Kathryn, if you happen to be here, just throw a comment in so I can invite you, and I'm just going to do my own part and share this out to the Getting Unstuck Facebook page. It's our little Facebook community. Has parents, people with OCD, therapists. So, oh, cool, Kathryn's here. So let me invite you in, and she'll join us. We'll start talking about obsessive compulsive disorder. Hi, everybody. If you're here, it'd be great to throw a comment in. Tell me where you're coming from and where you're watching.
Whatever. Hi.
Good morning. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm excellent.
Thank you.
Got a little bit of a
Can you turn down the volume? Yes.
I'll do the same. Might be me.
Okay. Is it better?
Yeah, a little better. Hi, Mary.
Nice to meet you.
All right.
So
thanks for joining me today.
I really appreciate it. How are you doing? I'm doing okay. I mean, I'm tired, but other than that, I'm good.
It is 9 a.m.
It is 9 a.m. where you are. I've got a few hours more to wait.
Yeah.
I would love. We connected, I think, actually a while ago through your mom, who I think you had done an article about your experiences with OCD, and then we connected via Instagram. So I would love you to tell everybody how OCD first started in your life and give a little bit about your story. Okay, so OCD has kind of been present in my life for my entire life, but I was only diagnosed when I was 12. We look back, my parents and I, and we've realized that it really has been an issue my entire life, and that's been something that I've been struggling with. When I was younger, when I was 3, I was ordering and arranging my toys, so just little things like that. And then when I was in, 4th grade, I think, in 3rd grade, I started having a lot of contamination fears because that year my younger sister Lily was born. And so I had this really big fear that if I were sick or if I were somehow contaminated, that I would get her sick. And, with the catastrophizing thought that she would eventually die because of me. So that, I would say, is one of the main ways that it kind of showed up. And then when I was in 4th grade, I began having a lot of intrusive thoughts. And I told these thoughts to my parents because at the time I was reading a book series called The Series of Unfortunate Events. And a lot of the topics in those books are kind of dark. Yeah. Especially for younger kids. And this was the first time that I was ever exposed to such topics, such as alcoholism and child abuse. And basically from those, I just started having intrusive thoughts about alcohol and about child abuse. And I had all these fears around my parents, even though obviously my parents wouldn't do anything like that. They're irrational fears.
So I just want to pick up on that a little bit. So you were talking to them about intrusive thoughts because you were afraid they were going to do something to you, or you were doing something to them. Sometimes maybe I drank alcohol, or maybe I hit my sister, I hit you. How did that manifest?
Oh, it basically was that I was sharing the thoughts with my parents because I was worried that they would do stuff to me. Or that they would somehow, like whenever they would have, let's say, like a glass of wine or something, I would ask them, are you drunk? Are you drunk? Are you drunk? Just repetitively.
So you were
So
seeking,
you were seeking,
I don't know if that's
I don't know if that's really reassurance, but you were like really trying to figure out if something bad was going to happen.
Yeah, no, I definitely would say it's some type of reassurance, but I don't know if it's like the exact definition of reassurance.
And
And were you doing any compulsive behavior? And there's some of the things we talked about, whether it was clearly asking your parents questions, but contamination issues that you had with your sister, or even some of the perfectionism stuff, were you doing anything to try to mitigate that, the compulsive side of OCD?
Yeah, no, definitely. I'd say that like the main thing, so I'd say a lot of like my compulsive behaviors started with the contamination. So like one thing that I would do is I would constantly be washing my hands or using hand sanitizer. And anytime like I touched like let's say my face, I'd have to then wash my hands. Or before I touched my face, I'd have to wash my hands. Before I touched my sister, I'd have to wash my hands. And at the time, I had a teacher, my third grade teacher, who definitely was like, yeah, I know you need to use hand sanitizer all the time or else you're going to get sick. So that didn't help in any way.
Yeah, she was feeding
your
Really, yeah. So that was definitely like one of the ways. But I'd say also with my intrusive thoughts, I also had a lot of like fears that there was going to be a fire or like my house was going to burn down or that someone was going to come and rob us. So every night before bed, I'd ask my parents, like this was definitely a ritual, but I'd have to like say, no one's going to rob our house. The stove is turned off. Like all these things are turned off. The doors are locked. You're not going to die. I'm not going to die. Lily's not going to die, my sister. And yeah, I'd say that was like one of the main rituals, and that went on for a really long time. And every night before bed, I'd have to take part in that ritual.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's repetitive.
It's repetitive.
Thank you for the comment, teacher. I'm not really sure where the feedback is coming from.
Cut my other phone off. Just turn the volume down, so I'm not really sure.
If it gets really bad,
maybe we'll just restart this again.
Maybe it's
something to do with whatever Facebook app or who knows my phone.
But if you're just joining us, Kids Speak Out, myself and Kathryn, we're talking about having OCD as a kid and how she dealt with it, giving an idea of how it affected her family. Feel free to comment, share, ask a question, and because it's much more fun when it's interactive. And if you're a part of like an OCD or mental health community, it might be great to share this out to them so those people can check it out. Even if it's not live, you can see the replay. Speaking of which,
Mary with a comment. Thank you, Mary. You ever have trouble deciding if your thoughts were OCD or like, oh, this is just a regular thing?
Yeah, no, that's actually a really good question. Because for a while, like I said, I didn't know that my thoughts were OCD thoughts. But I feel like the main thing that distinguishes a normal intrusive thought from an OCD intrusive thought is the fact that it occurs on a more repetitive basis. And at the same time, I'd say it also turns into an obsession, which is something that really you can't like stop thinking about.
Right.
Like normally somebody with like a normal intrusive thought, because everybody has intrusive thoughts. I mean, it's not something that's just exclusive to OCD. But I'd say that it definitely like manifests itself in the way that with OCD, like I said, it really becomes an obsession and you can't stop thinking about it. It causes you a significant amount of distress. Whereas a normal intrusive thought may be like upsetting, but other than that, normal people would just be able to brush it off and just say, this is just a thought, it's not me or anything like that. But Yeah.
There's Mary, there's like a stickiness to the thought, which is what Kathryn's talking about. Does it really stay with you over and over, keep coming up, and maybe even a week or so later, you're worried about the same thing, or it becomes something more than it really is.
Yeah, definitely.
So you talked about how you started realizing it, brought it to your family. When before you knew it was OCD, how were your parents coping? How were they accommodating? How were they dealing with it? Was it just chaos? Talk about like that side of OCD, the early side.
Yeah, no. So I'd say like after I began having intrusive thoughts, those thoughts were pretty distressing to my parents because obviously when your child has those sorts of thoughts, it's upsetting to you because you don't want them to be in that distress or that pain or misery or whatever it may be. But so they took me to a child psychologist when I was 9, and I began seeing him on a regular basis for therapy sessions. And with that, it was more just like talk therapy, play therapy, where we just would play games, but it really wasn't anything that was necessarily helpful. But I feel like that was the main way that my parents would help a lot of times. Another thing is that for a while I would hear like voices in my head when I was younger. And I told my parents about it, and they thought that it could potentially be seizures.
Yeah.
Or epilepsy, because in my family there's a history of epilepsy. Like my dad had epilepsy. I mean, he doesn't have it now, but it went away when he was younger. So we thought it could potentially be that. So they took me to a neurologist who was like, I think this is just anxiety. And later, I mean, now when we think about it, we realize that it was just intrusive thoughts again. So I'd say that was like one of the main things that my parents did. They also, when I was older in like 7th and 8th grade, the perfectionism definitely started to come out. I had to be perfect in every way possible. I had to be perfect in school. My room had to be perfect. My appearance had to be perfect. Just everything had to be perfect. And it was just really tiring because obviously things aren't perfect. And so having to live up to that unrealistic expectation was just really overwhelming.
Sure, you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself every minute of every day.
Yeah, no, definitely.
So your parents were taking you to some therapy. How did the idea or expression of OCD come into your life? Do you remember who introduced that to you, how you discussed it, how you learned about it?
So basically, my mom is actually a psychologist, and she was the one who was like, I think there's like a bigger issue here, and she's like, I think you could potentially have OCD. And so she's the one who kind of unofficially diagnosed me, and then because she's my mom, she really can't officially diagnosed me. So they talked to my pediatrician and about like an OCD therapist, and she had some names. And so we went to the first name that she gave us, and there the therapist diagnosed me with OCD. And I was already diagnosed by the previous psychologist that I was seeing with generalized anxiety.
Yeah.
But I wasn't diagnosed with OCD until I was 12 by the OCD therapist.
So you took the Yale Brown compulsive disorder test thing?
I actually didn't take that until about a year later, which is kind of interesting. I took it because I wound up switching therapists. Because when things started to get really bad, because my therapist was pretty new to the OCD community and world, she felt that my case was too difficult for her. So she, said that, I should go see somebody else who has more experience and who could properly treat and do CBT with me.
That's really
lucky.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, and I have to say, the next person who I went to, my next therapist, is like amazing. I love her so much. And she was the one who really, because for a while I thought that OCD was a positive thing because I was getting amazing grades in school. I was getting a lot of attention from my teachers because of it. And it was just something.
You were a model student because everything looked great, was perfect, and Kathryn's well behaved, all that type of stuff.
Yeah, no, very much so. And so basically we were like, yeah, no, this is definitely something. I was like, yeah, no, this is something that's good in my life. Whereas my other therapist, she was like, no, this is something that's really affecting you. And over time, through many sessions, she helped me realize how detrimental it was to my life. And we also took the Yale Brown obsessive compulsive test. And through that, I was then at the very top of, I think I was 1 point away from the max. Something crazy like that.
Was
your OCD when it was at its height, keeping you out of school, keeping you from socializing activities, all those things? It was like,
how much of your life
was OCD?
Pretty much all of it. I mean, I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't eating. It got to the point where I couldn't go to school. I wasn't socializing with people. All I was doing homework for hours and hours and hours. And that was like all that I was doing.
And it wasn't just
like doing an assignment, it was redoing it, I imagine.
Yeah.
Must have taken you days to write a paper or write a paragraph.
Yeah, no, I mean, it took me over 50 hours to write an essay. So it took me like 10 hours to write a single paragraph. Which is crazy.
So your teachers
are giving you these assignments.
You're turning them in.
They're amazing. They're going, oh my God, you're so fantastic. And when your teachers in class are giving you homework, it's like torturous to you.
No, very much so. But then I had that OCD voice saying, well, if I don't get the homework, then I'm not going to go to a good college, because that was one of my other major fears, was going to a good school. And I only felt that, I mean, like when I was in like, when I was in like 7th grade, because here out in San Francisco, the high school process is kind of like the college process in some ways.
New York, same
thing.
Yeah, no. So it's like, all the applications and tests and interviews and things like that. So I was like really worried that I wasn't going to get into a good high school. And so that was like my worry at the time. And then after I got into a good high school, then my worry became getting into a good college.
It just kept going.
It really did. And then after that, it was like getting into a good graduate school or law school or med school or whatever I wanted to do.
You just kept replaying it in your head. And my guess is, describe
it to me.
You thought every single piece of homework was going to affect that thing years later.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, it was something where like I thought like every homework assignment was this critical to the point where it could either make or break me.
And were you able to, how are your family dealing with it? Like you mentioned your sister earlier, how was she affected by all this stuff? I mean, was it all about OCD for you and the family and everything, controlling everything?
Yeah, no, it definitely impacted my family tremendously. I mean, like with my parents, they had to do a lot of things to accommodate my OCD because they didn't really know that they were accommodating it at the time. So like when writing an essay, I'd have to have my dad or my mom right next to me, and I would be reading off sentences and I'd be like, is this good? Is this good? Or is this something that's, going to be beneficial to my overall grade, or is it contributing well to the essay? But I'd say that was definitely like one of the main ways that my parents would, contribute to the OCD. But they didn't know that they were doing anything bad. They thought that they were just doing what a normal parent would do, would be to help your child.
Sorry, I'm trying to switch to this, hoping that the echo goes away. Hello.
Hello.
Sorry everybody for
Sorry everybody for the echo. I apologize for that. Do you hear that as well?
No, I mean, I could hear it when you put the headphones in.
Okay.
We'll keep going.
Anyway, if you've got questions, this is UNSTUCK Kids Speak Out. Feel free to ask questions. Kathryn has been dealing with OCD for a while. We're going to start talking about how therapy worked and problems and solutions and how that process worked, and if she did exposure therapy or how, she was able to kind of get herself in a better place and her family in a better place.
So
all questions about obsessions, compulsions, intrusive, everything, feel free to ask. So let's go into, you mentioned therapy, you found a good therapist.
How did that initially work, or
was it
set you
did it set you backwards? Like
how would your
therapeutic side of OCD go?
Okay, so basically once I found my good therapist, then with her, all the sessions, because it was so bad, I really wasn't able to do CBT yet, just because I was in such a bad place. But through her, she made me realize that I needed residential treatment. So I then went to residential in Wisconsin, and I was there from August of 2017 to November of 2017. So I was there for around 3 months.
Yep.
And through that, I mean, I definitely was able to access, treatment, and it was definitely going a lot better than it was back at home, because I just needed that level of intensity for it to actually be effective. But yeah, no, all the different aspects of treatment there definitely helped and worked. So there was, group therapy that was definitely really helpful, because one part of residential that I felt like was really good was the fact that I was able to meet a lot of other kids with OCD, because before then I had never met anyone with OCD. I didn't know really how multifaceted OCD could be. I just thought that OCD was just, hand washing and cleaning.
And what you had.
Yeah. So I didn't think that it could have such a broad spectrum.
It's interesting. So right around the time you're going to
intensive
therapy, we had just launched UNSTUCK, and it was in San Francisco at the IOCD app. It just goes to show you how sometimes it's hard to find the information you need because you were stuck going. No one else really has this issue. I know I'm feeling lonely. And 1,500 people, including probably 800 kids with OCD, were right in your backyard
a month earlier.
Yeah, no, my mom actually was telling me, because she wanted to go to it, but she was actually, my whole family went out to go visit me that weekend, so they missed it. But I know my mom really wanted to see it, I remember, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's so cool that they made a whole movie dedicated to OCD, especially kids with OCD.
And it was,
well, one of the reasons you just mentioned it, and I think none of us are alone in feeling this way. When you are going through something, you think you're the only one having these thoughts. And a lot of what you said has been echoed in other kids who talked about kids in the film. They're like, wow, I didn't realize that there were tons of other kids dealing with this, other issues that didn't bother me, bothered other kids. And there's tremendous, I think, cathartic nature and also being able to feel like you can do this when you learn that other kids are suffering as well and fighting it in their own way.
Yeah, no, I feel like it definitely is very comforting. Like you said, it's just to know that other people also are going through something similar. I mean, obviously you wouldn't wish that upon anyone, because even to the people that I dislike the most, I would never wish OCD upon them. It just is such a terrible thing. But I definitely would say that it just was nice to know that other people were also struggling and that I wasn't alone in this battle.
Well, you just touched on something. You mentioned earlier you thought it was good, and for a while you thought, hey, it drove you. And it was a good thing. And most people think, oh, this is a good thing to obsess over something. They just don't realize the torture part of it and how, even your teachers thought it was wonderful you had this behavior, but really it was torturing you. You had to do this. If they had known it took you so much time.
Yeah. No, because I feel like some of my teachers started to realize that there was something else going on. Because like, let's say I was in like math class and I'd be doing a problem up on the board, and let's say I got the answer wrong. One of my like compulsions, or at residential, what they called it, a banned behavior, was apologizing for my mistakes. Like if I got something wrong, I'd apologize. And so I began apologizing to my teacher, like one time when I got a problem wrong, and she's like, "Why are you apologizing? I mean, you're a student, you're learning." And I was like, "I'm so sorry, I got it wrong. I'm such a bad person." And I just went on this whole like rant about how I just was, a disgrace to the school, and all these like really catastrophic like explanations.
I just want to take a second to acknowledge Geraldine. Thank you so much for your comment. Kathryn, if you want to read that, it's all for you.
Let me see. I can't access the comments right now.
Sometimes if you swipe left. I just have a question. Are you
yeah.
also have this on a laptop?
Oh, that's really interesting.
That's a great comment. Thank you, Geraldine. Deidre, I don't know where the echo is coming from.
I think it's more on my
side than it is on Kathryn's side. Sometimes if you have like
a couple
in a room playing sound, like if there was someone, if you had this on a laptop and a phone at the same time, the echo will happen.
But
I don't know.
I'm trying not to talk
as much.
as I talk. So let me talk to you about OCD therapy, exposure therapy,
and I would love to know
if the therapist in San Francisco thought there was something that specifically why you need to go to residential treatment. Was the exposure therapy not working? Could you not do it? Were your parents not able to help you? Like how? What therapy were you doing?
Well, so you know that I was with a therapist originally, and then she thought my case was too complex. So in her document, like when I forget what it's called, but when like a therapist, you're done with a therapist and they have to write like something about you. And her recommendations for me were to go to residential and in Wisconsin. And that was like her whole, mantra at this point. She was like, "You need to go to residential." And my mom's like, "No, she doesn't need residential. Like, I know my daughter. She doesn't need to be away from us." But when in actuality, I really did need it. And we just thought that was, just something that was just complete, just wasn't anything that was real at that point. So I knew about residential at that point. And then I just was really struggling. Like I just became really depressed and I became suicidal, and it just was really hard. And I was the one who was like, said to my parents and said to my therapist at the time, I was like, "I think I need residential." And I was the one who kind of initiated that.
So were you relieved when you got the call saying, you're going to Wisconsin?
In some points, yes, but in some points, no, because I mean, I went to Wisconsin right at the beginning of my sophomore year. I mean, the day that everyone went back to school, I was admitting to residential. So it definitely was like really hard because I was just so nervous about what other people would think. Because I didn't tell that many people about it because I was just really worried about like what other people would say or think about it. So I only told maybe a couple people at my school about it, but I didn't tell that many people. I mean, I told some of my close friends, but other than that, not very many people. So I just had this like really irrational fear that people would think like that I did something bad, that's why I wasn't at school or all these sorts of things. So then it kind of went back into the OCD. But at the same time, I'd say it was definitely relieving because it was just something that I was like truly in need of. And it just felt so good to be in a place where everyone knew what I was talking about. Like what I said to them about what I was going through wasn't a shock or a surprise.
Right.
Like it was normal.
So you're in residential treatment. How does that go? How does that work? What do they teach you? What are the things you focused on, and how did it help you get better?
Okay, so there are definitely many components to residential. So maybe I'll go through like what we kind of did on a regular day basis.
Fantastic.
So we'd wake up, we'd have breakfast, then we would go to school. So they had like a schoolroom there at the hospital, and they basically had some teachers there who were also like therapeutic teachers. And what we did is they would get work from our schools. They would be in contact with, like for me, they were in contact with my school counselor.
Mm-hmm.
And through that, he was kind of like the pinpoint, and he would reach out to all my teachers and reach back to the teacher there at residential. And through that, I was able to get work, which was like pretty good for me just because I was able to tackle a lot of like exposures around my work, because that was like the whole thing. Because I mean, we realized that I needed to go to residential around May, but we didn't want me to go over the summer because school wasn't in session and I wouldn't be doing my actual work. And like one thing is that I really wasn't able to mimic the situation or replicate the situation outside of like in exposure therapy, because I was like, oh yeah, this is an actual schoolwork, so it doesn't really bother me.
Sure.
So I would use school, and through that I would be doing exposures around my work. Like I would be timing things. I could only do things a certain amount of times. And slowly over time, we would reduce that. So like rereading is one of my main compulsions, and rewriting. So I'd have to do a lot of things where I would only be able to read something once, or I would only be able to write something once or read it back once, or just there were like a lot of different things over time because I did it like an exorbitant amount of times. I mean, it just went on and on and on. But
so
then
you really school part in the morning where everybody that you're there with goes to school. That was also therapy for you. That was also doing exposures. Teachers taking things away from you, perhaps. You can't finish this.
Yeah, no, it was definitely. I mean, I feel like every aspect of the day, like there was also art therapy, something called experiential therapy, which basically is like PE, but more fun because they have like the location there is really pretty. Like it's on a lake, and there are, a lot of really cool activities to do. So for some people, those activities would be exposures for them. So there were like different parts of the day which were more stressful for some people or anxiety provoking for some, whereas for others it was kind of a break.
Were you doing exposures together or helping each other through therapy? So if there was a kid that had a problem going in a kayak, you would do that, and they would feel, you'd like build a street, and there was kind of a camaraderie being built and everybody working together.
Yeah, no, very much so. I mean, when we did, because after school, then we did experiential therapy, and like they really pushed me on a lot of those sorts of things because I had some like contamination fears around dirt and getting dirty. So obviously, what do they have me do but go caving, where you crawl in the dirt? So I'd say that definitely everybody there was really supportive of it, and kind of saying you got this and you can do it, and those sorts of like nice encouraging statements.
But the first thing you did wasn't go into the cave, right?
I
imagine there was like small things, maybe playing with some soil, looking at pictures of the cave, those type of things.
I mean, for me, it wasn't like that big of an issue for me, like the dirt. Like I have to say, like the primary time I was there was working on my perfectionism and my social anxiety. Like those were the two main things that I worked on. But I did work on some of those things. Like I had to like I would go on a hike and I'd get dirty, let's say, and I couldn't clean or like wash off my hands afterwards or things like that. So small steps. And then they eventually had me like crawling in the dirt.
How would you say on a scale of 1 to 10, how hard and easy was it to do this? Any of these therapies?
Probably like a 10. A lot of them were. They were really hard. They were probably the hardest thing I've ever done. Like the therapy, I mean, in general, like, it's just really hard.
OCD
Like,
therapy, at least one of the main ones that people use is called exposure response prevention.
Yeah.
How would you describe that, and how would you describe its effect and the ability to kind of overcome OCD?
Like, so exposure response prevention, ERP, basically is where, let's say, I'll talk about some examples. But so for me, I had a lot of things about rereading. So basically with exposure and response prevention, I would limit myself from rereading. And over time, I would slowly, like, let's say I reread around 20 times. Over time, I would limit myself to how many times I could reread. And over time, and I would sit with that anxiety. And over time, the anxiety went down and it became more manageable. So if I were to do that, let's say in everyday life, it wouldn't be as anxiety provoking. So basically it's putting yourself in kind of a faux situation and acting like it's a real one and being able to apply that to your real life.
And how is it helping you now? You've been out of residential for almost a year. Sounds like over a year.
Yeah.
How are you practicing it now every day? How has life been since then?
Well, I mean, I did relapse. So I did wind up having to go back, but not for residential. I went back for PHP. And I did PHP actually out here in California, in Walnut Creek. And there I did PHP, and then I transitioned down to IOP, which, if people don't know what that is, PHP is partial hospitalization program, and IOP is intensive outpatient. And so PHP was 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. And then IOP was like 3 hours, 5 days a week also.
Yes, but Ariel from our film, that's kind of what happened with her. She did PHP and was really happy when I moved to IOP.
Yeah, no, it was definitely like a big deal. Like we had like a whole graduation like ceremony, like when I went down, and one of like the big things that they have there is they have this wall where you get to write a quote on the wall and put a handprint up. And so that was like pretty significant, just a pretty significant, like there's symbolism in my journey that I made it to that point, and that I was, I'd gone through so much. I'd been through residential, I was now in PHP, and I made it through that, which PHP in a sense I felt like was harder than residential, because in residential you're sheltered from a lot of things, like just certain like life-altering events that were going on in the world I didn't know about while I was in residential. Like the whole event, like the shooting in Las Vegas, I didn't hear about that like until like 3 weeks later. Like that's how sheltered it was, because you didn't have your phones, you didn't watch like the news, you didn't go on to social media or just anything where a lot of people would find out about these events.
Right.
But whereas with PHP, I was out there with all the triggers, and I was able to, really experience everything. And I was able to go, because one of my things that I wound up having a lot of trouble with was my social anxiety, just being at school and being around other kids. So sitting in a classroom for me was excruciating. It was just so hard for me because I was just so worried about being around other kids and what that would entail.
When you got out of residential and went back into school, did your OCD automatically kick back in, or did it take a little while?
It took a little while. Like there's one thing that I know some people call it like the honeymoon stage, where things are like really good. after you get out of residential and you're like, oh my gosh, I can conquer the world, everything's good. But then what happens is reality starts to kick in, and OCD begins to kick back in. And what you have to do is use your skills. But there were some things that I wasn't able to tackle well in residential. Because one thing was that, I'm not sure if maybe my mom has mentioned this to you, but insurance, they didn't cover any of it. Yeah. And so, I mean, that's just kind of really emphasizes how the system is not where it should be.
I know that's like a big number one complaint about the residential services that are all out of pocket.
Yeah.
My wife and I joke that our daughter got OCD and we got debt. I have a couple questions from our friends on Instagram, but I also wanted to ask you, because I think after you come out of residential, you have a period where you're okay, there's some relapse. Were you able to immediately start using your tools to recognize, oh, this is OCD?
I mean, once I was in PHP and IOP, yes. But like I said, because of the fact that I wasn't able to be there for that long because my parents were paying out of pocket, and it just got really, really expensive because I was there for over 3 months.
Yeah.
So they kind of, I mean, I was still at a good place when I left, but I wasn't at like the point where I was like all fixed and all cured and everything. It wasn't all that. So I'd say that I still wasn't able to go back and really utilize my tools that I'd learned, just because I was still kind of in the heat of the battle. But when I was when I was in PHP and IOP, one thing that they really emphasized was using my tools and using my skills so that I could prevent relapse. So that was something that we really, focused on there. So I have, a ton of self-soothing tools, and a lot of DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, was utilized. And yeah.
It's a lot of people think that you might be able to cure yourself from OCD, and you're just describing that it's almost like you learn how to be vigilant of it.
Yeah,
and
very
if it
much.
comes back, then you go, okay, I'll deal with the anxiety, and now I know I have to fight and use my tools, those type of things.
Yeah, no, that's definitely, I mean, OCD is a chronic illness. I mean, it's never going to be completely cured, or at least at this point in today's day and age. But, I mean, at the same time, it's just something that you have to learn to live with, even though it's terrible and horrible and just all these, things I could use to describe it. But at the same time, you just really have to learn how to live with it and, get on with your life and say that OCD is not going to impair me to the point where I can't live and do what I want to do.
Wise words. If you're just tuning in, you want to ask a question of Kathryn, feel free. She's clearly pretty smart and schooled on a lot of compulsive behavior issues, as well as therapeutic insurance issues. I got two questions from our friends over on Instagram.
Oh, cool.
Anna asked, with your obsessive thoughts, how vivid are they? How would you see them in your head? The question is, how vivid were your obsessive thoughts?
They were quite vivid. I mean, the imagination is just, it's a pretty complex thing. So the thoughts were definitely vivid. I mean, graphic and just really disturbing, because like the main types of intrusive thoughts that I would have were self-harm intrusive thoughts, and sexual intrusive thoughts. And so, like, obviously I'm not going to go into depth, but just the sexual ones were definitely really, because I had a major fear of being raped. It was really irrational. It just was like based on like the news and things happening, and especially with, let's say, politics and everything that was going on at the time, that just became a really prominent worry of mine.
And you mentioned everything being catastrophized. So it's
Yeah.
not just, I know I'm getting graphic, but like the fear of being raped, there's a visual component of you're playing it in your head, or you might see it violently. So you're automatically going to that place rather than dismissing it.
Yeah, no, it went to a place where it was scary to an extent. I mean, it was just really terrifying. And yeah.
I want to get to the question right here that Martin's asking. Yeah, it is a great interview. Sorry about the feedback. He's wondering how significant the last relapse was on things like your mood and your social anxiety.
That's actually a really good question because the thing is, one thing that I didn't really talk about, but my medication at the time, that definitely played a part into things. And so, one part of it was the whole psychiatry aspect. So at both residential, PHP, and IOP, I had a psychiatrist, and outside, I had a private psychiatrist. And so for one thing is that they were trying to like find a good combination of meds that would be effective. And what we realized was that I was pretty non-responsive to medication. I would take, let's say I would take my meds and I would be on them for a really long period of time and nothing would work. Like I would have I would have some negative side effects like weight gain and like some sedation. But other than that, I would definitely not like experience any positive effects. But I would say that one aspect of like my mood would be that because I was switching on and off of medications, I became severely depressed and was experiencing a lot of suicidal ideation at the time. So I was just in a really dark place. It was like in July when I was like in the middle of all my treatment, because I went into PHP in April and was there until like beginning of August.
Mm-hmm.
That
where you learned about DBT?
Yes. And now I actually have a separate DBT therapist outside of like resident or outside of PHP and IOP.
Another question Maya was asking, did OCD ever affect your eating habits, things that you ate?
Yeah, no, very much so. Because I had a lot of like, most of my contamination that still occurs today is around food. So like a lot of it was around like if somebody were to touch my food, I'd feel that the food was then contaminated, and I needed to know exactly where the food came from, and like I said, who touched it, who made it. So I could only have certain people make my food. And that was really hard, especially in residential where you had to eat what they had. And I was like, it kind of got to the point where I kind of had to force myself into eating because like I wasn't eating for a period of time because I just was so like fearful of other people touching the food and the type of food that they had, and that it wasn't like the food that I had at home, obviously, because it's a hospital, technically hospital food, which is not, good. Yeah, no, so I'd say that it definitely affected the way that I ate. But then I kind of got to the point where I just began eating because I was like, yeah, no, I don't want to be put in an eating disorder because that's all that I need. But
so explain if it would affect you. Explain some of the things you might have done to get over those fears that you do in everyday life to get over that. Anxiety.
Yeah.
When food is put in front of you.
Well, I'd say like the main thing is that like I kind of had like a food fear hierarchy. And so like there were certain foods that I was like kind of like freaked out by. Like that I was freaked out to try there. I mean, I had them before and I liked them, but for some reason I thought the food there was different and that it would somehow like taste weird or contaminate me or get me sick or, a lot of these catastrophizing thoughts. But I definitely, like one thing that I had a major fear of was like dairy. when I was there, because coming from California, I mean, obviously Wisconsin's like the cheese state, so there's like, you know, they know their dairy. But coming from California, I just had this really weird fear, because whenever I would travel, like outside of California, I would never drink dairy outside of California, because I just was worried that it would taste weird, or that I would get sick from it, or that I would be supporting like, you know, that, like, because I also have like a lot of fears about like doing things to hurt other people or animals. And so I had this like fear that like if I were to drink milk and let's say they treated the company, they don't treat their cows very well. I had this like really irrational fear that that would somehow make me a horrendous person, a terrible person. And
Yeah, you used irrational fears and then exactly described it right there. And like, you know, drinking milk in one state is going to make you a bad person. That's, you know, it's a good description of OCD, because people think it's this physical thing, but it's really going here.
Yeah, I know. You know, but I was worried that that would make me a bad person. So what I did is I, over time, kind of just started trying dairy products there. And it wasn't bad, I mean. And I just kind of was able to prove the OCD wrong.
Which is so huge.
Yeah, very.
We like to see OCD is never told the truth. It's the lying disease. That's what the things we used to tell my daughter over and over. Like, we tell her, tell me one time that OCD was right.
Yeah.
And despite that, she still go, but you know, it could be right, and eventually over time it sticks in. So I really appreciate your time. Guys, if you have any questions last minute, let me know. I have a couple more questions for you. First thing, any books, resources, things that you would recommend people read, things that helped you or looked at or follow, you know, that helped you or your family understand OCD.
So for me, I felt like I didn't really use any like self-help OCD books, or just books about, you know, just OCD in itself. I've more so read a lot of like biographies or autobiographies of people with OCD, and a lot of novels about OCD and anxiety disorders as a whole. And those really helped me just to kind of like, because I'm an avid reader, I love to read. And that was one thing that really helped and comforted me, was just realizing that I really wasn't alone. And literature really helped me to realize that. So like some of my favorites are Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. I really like that one. And that's like my favorite, because I feel like it's such a good depiction of OCD. And at the same time, it also illustrates that there's more to people than OCD, because I've read some OCD novels, where it kind of shows that that's the only aspect of their personality or just who they are, which I feel like is a pretty inaccurate description, because you're so much more than your illness or your OCD or whatever you're going through.
Oh, sure. Have you read Pure O?
No, I don't think I have.
Or OCD Daniel?
I don't think I have, because I was more so like reading a lot of like OCD books in like the young adult genre. But I definitely am going to begin reading some other ones also.
Cool. That was great. Also, I always love to add these, allowing you to give advice to the audience in case they're watching. Any advice that you would give other kids, and then also parents.
Let's see, other kids, especially other kids who are struggling, it does get better. I mean, I feel like that's pretty generic, but at the same time, it's so true. Because for a while, I was in a really dark place. I thought that it wouldn't get better. I thought that I kind of had to stick with what I was given. And I thought that just it would not get better. I thought that that was how it was going to be. But the thing is, it does get better. It does. And I can say that from experience. Like a couple weeks ago, I was in a really dark place. And now I'm doing a lot better. And I'm going to school every day. I'm, you know, conquering a lot of my fears. And it just is like it really does get better. And I feel like that's something that we really need to emphasize to others.
Yeah, you have to keep working on it, which is what you're just speaking. A couple weeks ago, you were having problems, and chances are you'll have it down the road.
Yeah, no, definitely.
You use the tools.
Mhm.
Kathryn has a fantastic following on Instagram. I'm going to tell you in the comments, please do a link to your page or pages. There's a lot of inspirational content as well as your own personal content, which I highly recommend.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for joining me today. And everybody, I'm sorry about the echo. I'll restart my phone and hopefully it'll go away next time. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Turn that off. Thank you everybody for joining. Again, my name is Chris Bear. I produced Unstuck, an OCD kids movie, and it's been my pleasure for the last year to have kids on talking about their issues, explaining OCD in their own words. To me, I learn something every time. You get an idea of how strong they are, what they've learned, how insightful they can be, and the fact that if you have a child or you have OCD now, you understand that you're not the only one, and that there is a constant struggle, and you can get better, and there's a community here that can help you out. So I hope Kathryn's interview today was helpful. It's certainly helpful to me. And if you're watching the replay, feel free to add comments because we will keep asking them. I'll put this up on YouTube in a couple days. And I hope everybody has a great happy holidays, happy December 1st, and we'll see you in 2019.